All right, let's dive into one of the greatest underdog stories in all of history, the Greco-Persian Wars. Seriously, this is the story of a gigantic empire taking on a scrappy bunch of city-states in a fight that, honestly, would go on to shape the entire course of Western civilization. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to set the stage and look at these two clashing worlds. Then, we'll march into the legendary Battle of Marathon. After that, we'll get into the Great Invasion, think Thermopylae. We'll see how the Greeks turned the tide with some brilliant strategy. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the incredible legacy these wars left behind. So, what was this whole conflict really about? Well, at its heart, it was a collision between two totally different ways of seeing the world. I mean, look at the two sides. On one hand, you've got the Persian Empire. It was the biggest, richest, most powerful empire the world had ever seen, led by kings like Darius and Xerxes. And on the other, you have this scattered collection of small Greek city-states, places like Athens and Sparta, who, were always arguing with each other, but they were absolutely united on one thing. Nobody was going to tell them what to do. And if you want to boil this entire war down to just one idea, it's this one: autonomy. For the Greeks, the right to govern themselves wasn't just some political idea. It was everything. It was who they were, and they were absolutely willing to die for it. This stood in total contrast to the Persian way of doing things, one big, centralized empire. The whole thing really kicked off with the Ionian Revolt. You had these Greek cities over in what's now Turkey. They were under Persian rule, and they rebelled. Athens, trying to help out their fellow Greeks, sent over some ships. Well, to the Persian king Darius I, this was a huge insult. He was furious. And right then and there, he decided he was going to punish Athens and bring all of Greece under his control. And that leads us to the very first major test of this conflict. Darius didn't just want an apology. He wanted conquest, and he sent an invasion force to get it. So in 490 BCE, a huge Persian army lands on a beach called Marathon, just a stone's throw from Athens. The Athenians were outnumbered, big time. This was it, their moment of truth. And what happened next was just incredible. The Athenians didn't just stand their ground. They charged. They completely shattered the Persian lines. This victory was a massive psychological blow to the Persians. And for the Greeks, it was pure adrenaline. It proved that this supposedly invincible empire could, in fact, bleed. But of course, the empire wasn't going to take that lying down. Darius's son, Xerxes, came to power, and he inherited his father's ambition. He put together one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen to finish the job for good. The stakes were suddenly so much higher. This second invasion plays out in this unbelievable sequence of famous battles over 2 really critical years. First, you have the heroic last stand at Thermopylae. Then the whole game changes with the naval battle at Salamis. And finally, it all comes down to a massive land battle at Plataea. And you can't talk about this war without talking about this number, 300. At a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae, a tiny Greek force, led by King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, decided to make a stand. Now, they were eventually defeated, but their sacrifice was absolutely not in vain. By holding back that gigantic Persian army for 3 whole days, they bought the rest of Greece precious time to get ready. Their bravery became this immortal legend, right? The ultimate symbol of fighting for your freedom, no matter the odds. So after Thermopylae, things looked grim. The Persians marched on, and they actually burned Athens to the ground. It really seemed like all was lost. But this is where the war pivots, from just heroic sacrifice to truly brilliant strategy. And this is where the Athenian general Themistocles becomes a superstar. He knew the Greeks couldn't win a straight-up fight against the massive Persian navy out in the open sea. So he laid a trap. He tricked the Persian fleet into a narrow channel of water, the Straits of Salamis, where their huge numbers actually became a weakness. The smaller, faster Greek ships just zoomed around them, ramming and sinking the Persian vessels. It was a complete disaster for the Persians. The very next year, 479 BCE, the war reached its final climax on land. At the Battle of Plataea, a truly united Greek army, this time led by the Spartans, met the rest of the Persian forces. They won a clear, decisive victory, and that was it. The Persian invasion was over.
Look, it's an amazing story of battles and strategy, but the real impact goes so much deeper than the battlefield. I mean, why are we still talking about this stuff 2,500 years later?
Well, the answer is that the Greek victory didn't just save a few cities. It literally preserved a set of ideas that would go on to shape the entire world as we know it. The victory launched Athens into its golden age. This is the period that gave us mind-blowing art, philosophy, and theater. But maybe most importantly, it protected this brand new fragile idea of democracy. It allowed the ideas of thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle to grow, and those ideas became the very bedrock of Western thought.
When you strip it all down, this was a war of ideas just as much as it was a war of armies. The outcome was going to decide whether Europe would be shaped by a top-down imperial model or by a model of individual freedom and citizen-led government.
And that leaves us with this one last, really powerful question. Just think about it for a second. What would our world be like if the Persians had won at Marathon or Salamis? Would democracy have even survived? Would we have the same philosophy, science, and art? The world we live in today was, without a doubt, forged in the fires of these ancient battles.